Hi guys, Sajid Amit here and welcome to another review on the Amplify channel. In today's review, I want to talk about headphones that I have talked about before, but not against each other, not in a comparison. And I have in mind the HIFIMAN Susvaras, as some of you might know my favorite headphone, and the Raal SR1a, which is an incredible headphone. So I have these headphones here. The Susvara requires slightly more gentle handling. And of course the Raal, which also requires gentle handling because of, well, it really doesn't. Neither do. They're both pretty well built. But in this review, I want to sort of take you guys through the aesthetics, build, and comfort, the tonality or the frequency response, and I'll also take you through the technical performance of these two. And overall, I'll sort of conclude with a summary. Now, to start with the Susvaras, these are wonderful headphones, the HIFIMAN's Halo product. So you've seen this before, I'm sure, in multiple reviews, as well as mine. The aesthetics to me are great. Very subjective, of course. I first of all like the very traditional form factor. It's not super traditional, of course. It's got this leather strap and a metal band, which I've seen a lot of people not like, but I don't mind this sort of double, two sort of pieces hanging over my head. People have complained about the wood lining, and people have also wanted this to be genuine wood. I think this looks nice, guys. Of course, for $6,000, you can expect carbon fiber, you can expect a whole bunch of expensive materials, but this does the work for me. The brushed metal, I've talked about this before. Overall aesthetically, so I don't want to get into details again about the Susvaras because I think the Raal is a headphone that I have not discussed extensively yet in terms of aesthetics. So let me just talk about the Raal. So this is what the Raal looks like. This pad does not come with the Raal. This is a ZMF Pilot pad, which I bought because I find this more comfortable. A lot of Raal owners will buy the ZMF Pilot pad in addition to whatever the very thin strap the Raal comes with, and this pad basically engulfs the thinner pad the Raal comes with, as well as this metal strip that you can see here. So what I basically do is I Velcro this pad. The pad comes with the Velcro, of course, around the thinner Raal strap and this thin metal strap because I find this more comfortable. And overall, aesthetically, this is very polarizing, of course. It's very sci-fi looking. The ribbon drivers are here, of course. And there's black. There's a bit of red here. These are these soft cushions that basically rest on your temple and makes wearing this very comfortable. So in terms of comfort, there's a lot of debate about the Raal because for instance, first of all, it is very comfortable because the Raal does not clamp on your ears. So this is what the Raal looks like, right? Okay, this looks funny, I know. I mean, I pretend that it doesn't, but it does. I don't mind that it looks funny. So this is what the Raal looks like when these flaps are not touching my ears. So that's where the comfort comes from. A lot of people like that. However, it does feel a little flimsy. So if I shake my head very hard forward, this is going to fall off. The Raal does come with a back strap, which I avoid. I feel like 1 out of 10 Raal owners I know use that back strap, but anyway, I could be wrong with the statistic, but it's not. Most people I know do not use the back strap because it's just one more thing to do when you put it on. But you don't need the back straps. Overall, it's comfortable, right? Because like I said, it's just floating on my head. These don't create too much pressure on the temples either. And of course, you can take this out, which makes me look funnier. Elephant ears, whatnot, but you do that to get more soundstage and you lose bass and sort of the mid-range becomes thinner. But I'll get into the sound later. Overall, this is comfortable. Aesthetics are what they are, very subjective. Like I said, it's very polarizing. I like the aesthetics. I've reached a point when these sort of newfangled aesthetics and headphones that push the boundaries of aesthetics don't disappoint me. I'm not looking for conventional form factor like the Focal Radiance here, which is a very conventional form factor compared to the newer headphones or the headphones that I've bought more recently, like the Abyss 1266 Phi TC that you see over there. But yeah, overall, it is comfortable. I think it looks nice. But comfort-wise, for some reason, guys, I still like the Susvara's comfort. These AirPads are very cushiony. And I actually like the cushiony AirPads against my skin for whatever reason, and I just find it comforting and this is very comfortable for me. So overall, for aesthetics, build, and comfort, although I do think the Raal will take it for the build, I think overall Susvara will edge the Raal for me because aesthetically I think this is more conventional, although I don't mind the aesthetics here. Build-wise, the Raal is better, I think, because of the enormous amount of carbon fiber and metal and leather. And comfort-wise, I think the Susvara is more comfortable. Now, to talk about tonality first, frequency response, if you will. This is interesting because I don't think you can divorce tonality from the technical performance when you talk about high-end headphones, because the tonality does have an impact on the technical performance, at least insofar as we perceive it. And it's very difficult to sort of separate what we perceive from what's actual, right? So I'll tell you what I mean. So a lot of people, if you've seen a review of Raal versus Susvara and on HeadFi, you'll find threads of owners who own the Raal, the Stax 009 or 009S, the Susvara, and the Abyss 12665TC, the four sort of the most Summit-Fi headphones, barring the HE1, of course, and the Shangri-La from HIFIMAN. So if you see these discussions, there's a consensus among Summit-Fi owners that the Raal is more resolving than the Susvara. However, I think there's a caveat here, because, and I know I'm talking about technical performance because I do think it connects with tonality. What happens with the Raal, if you look at the frequency response of Raal, it has more lower treble, upper mid energy. Now, what that does is that it gives Raal a clarity. A lot of people I know mistake this clarity with some kind of technical performance, but then it's really the tuning. Now, the Susvara is not unclear. God no, it's super clear. However, using my Acuvate speaker amp, I am able to increase the treble because I have tone control, and when I do that, when I increase the treble, Susvara becomes even more clear, right? It becomes even clearer. So the Susvara can be made to almost match the clarity levels of the Raal SR1a, right? So I think that's worth keeping in mind, because a lot of times we confuse clarity with things like transparency, which has a completely different meaning to me. A lot of times we confuse clarity with information or detail retrieval, which is also, I think, misleading. I do think tonality-wise, the Raal is more treble focused. So I'll tell you what that means. So on a lot of tracks, on most tracks, or I think on any track, the treble will come through more clearly on the Raal, right? Which might be great for you, or it might be a deal breaker for you. The Raal, again, because of its tuning and also because of its ability to retrieve detail from tracks, can be sibilant. It's not very sibilant, and I can get over, and I'll just, sort of fast forward, or I'll just, press next and hear the next track. But I think what happens though is the Raal can be more track picky and the Susvara is more forgiving. That's just, I think, a very solid conclusion I've reached. And and that's also because of its tuning, where it has more upper mids and upper mids and mostly lower treble energy. So this lower treble energy gives Raal this clarity. It can also be sibilant, like I said, slightly bright. I don't find this fatiguing. So that's something worth keeping in mind, because I do think the Raal is pretty reference, you know what I mean? And I think compared to the Raal, the Susvara is slightly more colored, and I'll get into that. Now, we've discussed treble. Mid-range wise, guys, if you like mid-range, let's say you're one of those persons who grew up with an HD650 and you love the ZMF Tour, and you wonder what the right Summit-Fi headphone is for you, it is not the Raal. I know people rave about the Raal's ability to do vocals, but it's not the Raal. And it's not the Abyss TC. If you are a mid-head, if you are a mid-range person, the Susvara is your natural upgrade from, of course, you go through the hoops, you go through the 650, the Sennheiser HD650, the Tour, perhaps more ZMF headphones, perhaps the Final D8000, which has great mids, and then the Susvara. Because what happens with the Susvaras is that the mids, well, it's not as forward and as in your face as the HD650 vocals, but it's more forward than the Raal vocals. And what that means is, so on any track, the vocals will be more present for you. So I actually hear more vocal details. We'll get into that later on the Susvara. And you'll hear more nuances in the vocals. The vocals is more emotional. And the reason I say the Susvara is slightly colored, because the Susvara has a touch of warmth. It's not a warm headphone, guys, by any means. It's certainly not a bright headphone, but if I had to sort of put it between bright and warm, I would say it's more on the warmer side. Slightly. It's just this very minor, sort of very slight tinge of warmth, which works beautifully. It gives the Susvara more tonal character, more tonal richness, and more richness. And so overall, I think Susvara mid-range trumps the Raal mid-range handily. Treble wise, honestly speaking, guys, although this is a slightly more resolving treble, I do think the Susvara treble is tuned better because I get all the details I want. And one more thing, guys, when people compare the detail retrieval of, and again, I'm jumping the gun here and talking about detail retrieval between the Susvara and the Raal, it's not night and day. These are minor differences. And I think a lot of people who have heard the Susvara, but I think the Susvara is not as close to the Raal, are not powering right. I mean, yes, I mean, a lot of amps power the Susvara, but I think even beyond something like a Bakun 13R, a speaker amp, a stereo amp, like, you know, a high-end stereo amp, like a Past Lab stereo amp or a Benchmark HB2 or the Accuphase 380 that I have over there can recover more detail from tracks on Susvara than I think the more traditional headphone amps can, or even the Bakun 13R can. So I do think the Susvara's ability to retrieve detail gets very close to the Raal, and it's just the tuning that makes the Raal, I think, appear to be slightly more resolving. Bass wise, no contest. Susvara bass is wonderful, guys, and I've been very satisfied with the bass. And in my written review, I did mention I like a little more bass impact, and that's only because the TC has spoiled me for bass impact. It's just amazing, the TC's bass impact, and now I have a higher threshold for what I like in terms of bass impact. But the Susvara slams hard, guys. If you have a chance to listen to Susvara from a speaker amp on tracks that have a lot of bass, this is bassy. This is a bassy headphone. This is a wonderfully balanced frequency response with a tinge of warmth. So that's the reason why I say this is very slightly colored. Now, overall, the basic differences in tonality, if I were to summarize, is that the Susvara has a richer tone, has a more liquid mid-range, has more emotional vocals, there's a tinge of warmth, etc. The Raal is more reference. The vocals are slightly pulled back. You hear the treble more than I think the mid-range with the Raal compared to the Susvara. If you're a treble head, you will love this. And yeah, so this is more reference, more trebly. This is a slightly more warm and more liquid. That takes care of the tonality. And if I have to pick one, I pick the Susvaras. Now, talking about technical performance, yeah, I mean, so the bass here, it does not. So if starting with detail retrieval, which I've already talked about, the detail retrieval of the Raal is slightly more. I do perceive more information on tracks than I do the Susvaras, but it's not by a lot, guys. And honestly speaking, a lot of the detail that I get with the Raal is, and I might sound controversial here, is irrelevant detail. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. I mean, you hear a certain other instrument or a certain other background instrument a little more clearly, or maybe you'll hear some person talking on stage, which you also do with the Susvara, which you perhaps will hear more clearly with the Raal. And but that stuff I don't think really adds to the enjoyment of music, but that's of course subjective. In terms of speed and dynamics, speed-wise, the Raal is superior to the Susvara. The speed here is amazing. The ribbon drivers are fast, as you know. If you've ever heard a ribbon speaker, they're super fast. And the Raal is super fast, and that's why the Raal is so enjoyable. But yeah, I do think the speed is more, but the dynamic slam and sense of macrodynamic slam and punch, much better. So I do think the degree to which the Raal is faster than the Susvara is surpassed by the degree to which the Susvara slams more than the Raal. If that makes sense. And of course, imaging and soundstage wise, the Susvara is fine. It's very clear images and soundstage is nice. It's sort of out of the head. But the Raal has much greater soundstage and much greater and better imaging. So if I were to sort of give you a sense of the soundstage of the Susvaras, I feel like the Susvaras, and I was trying this out today. I was A/Bing these two headphones a lot today. So with the Susvaras, I feel like the soundstage is here, right? It's sort of this arc here. It's very close to the head. With the Raal, I think it's like here. You know what I mean? It's slightly wider, especially if you open up the flaps, and you get a very complete sense of stage, and the images are very distinct. You can pinpoint imaging and the instruments and the vocalists, etc., and it's very nice for that. So yeah, the soundstage and imaging wise, the Raal SR1a I think is much better than the Susvara. And finally, Tambouride, this is a difficult one because timbre is influenced by so many things, right? The timbre is influenced, I think, by the drivers in these headphones. The timbre is influenced by the frequency response as well, and of course the tuning. Of course, and by frequency response, I mean the tuning. Now, in terms of timbre, they're both fine. They're both great. They're both pretty natural sounding. I like the Susvara's timbre a hair more because I do think the slight warmth that it has and this amazing vocal timbre sort of, you know, do it for me. So overall, in terms of technical performance, guys, it's not a clear. There's no clear-cut winner here, but this is a more complete headphone, technically speaking, because of the fact that it has slam. And there are all struggles for slam, guys. There are people suggesting convolution filters. There are people suggesting all kinds of things. I EQ the RAL using analog EQ on my AccuPhase amp, and it does work. It does give it some bass weight. And the bass isn't light. It's not like a floppy, poor quality bass. It's a fast, decent bass. The RAL does have a bass, especially if you don't listen to very high volumes. Because what happens is, guys, if you listen to the RAL on very high volumes and on bassy tracks, the ribbon drivers start clipping a bit. That's a fact. Now, is that a deal breaker for you or me? It's not a deal breaker for me, and I've not seen it be a deal breaker for a majority of the RAL users, but I do know one or two who have sold the RAL. So how would I put it? I would say that for 90% of RAL users out there, the bass or the lack of bass is not a deal breaker, guys, and I think that's worth keeping in mind. But if this is going to be your only headphone, you might not want this to be your only headphone. If you have a Susvara or a TC back there, then the RAL might be a good buy, I think. So, I mean, the discussion should have made it pretty evident, which I think is a better headphone. It is the HIFIMAN Susvara is a better headphone, I think. And not just by a bit, I think it's a better headphone by quite a lot. And the sort of advantage you get with the RAL of the added detail retrieval, etc., and the stage and space, it don't really matter to me ultimately. Like, it matters a lot to me, but vis-a-vis the Susvara, I prefer the Susvara because I think overall it's a better experience. But there are tracks when I think the RAL surpasses the Susvara, right? There are tracks like that, and these are a lot of sort of very tracks that have simple instruments, or even for tracks that have very complex instruments. So talking about genre matching, the RAL works a lot, very well with two kinds of tracks I've seen. It works with tracks that are very gigantic in their presentation, like an orchestra with complex instruments, where there's a lot of dynamic range, etc. Dynamic range, not dynamic slam. The RAL works really well with those sorts of tracks. It also works really well with very simple tracks, like if it's like a girl and a guitar, because then you sort of, it's very nice to image and get the minute details of string instruments or vocals, etc. The Susvara, compared to the RAL, only compared to the RAL, can be slightly more congested because the RAL is more open, but it's not congested in absolute terms. It's a very, very wonderful headphone, and the imaging is nice, etc. Susvara works amazingly with vocals, with string instruments, because strings have this natural weight. The vocals have this natural weight that you don't get with the TC or with the RAL. So the Susvaras are amazing if you're a vocal head. They have great slam. Now, a lot of people ask me, do the Susvaras work with metal, A, and do the Susvaras work with EDM? But starting with EDM, Susvara works excellent with EDM, because I feel like with EDM, you don't have a lot of vocals, and many people prefer the TC for EDM. I think what the Susvara does is, because it's a more musical headphone than the RAL or the TC, and let's say on things like Daft Punk, I love the melody and the fact that Susvara does melody really well. It sounds more beautiful, it sounds more musical. It slams well, but of course it doesn't slam as well as the TC does. Susvara works pretty well with EDM. With metal, I do think Susvara doesn't work as well as the TC does, because it has a way of making metal tracks very musical, which is nice, and I love Metallica on Susvara, but until I heard Metallica or Iron Maiden or Megadeth on the TC does make all kinds of metal genres work, whether it's black metal, heavy metal, speed metal, power metal, metalcore, what have you. Anyway, so that's it for the review between the RAL and the Susvara. In my humble opinion, the Susvara is a superior headphone, and I highly recommend you try it, especially if you like genres that I mentioned. The Susvara works with all genres, I think, although the TC works slightly better with metal. Anyway, so that's it for me, and stay tuned for further reviews. I have another review coming up on bassy headphones that I think you'll like. And stay safe during COVID, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you. Bye.